3 years ago, Pedro walked into Maria's lavish birthday party with a nervous excitement coursing through his veins. His heart pounded in his chest, and his hands felt clammy against the sides of his neatly ironed button-up shirt. Even though the party bustled with people, classmates, distant relatives, and friends of friends, Pedro felt like he was the only one in the room. His eyes zeroed in on Maria, the girl he had secretly adored for what felt like an eternity. She wore a shimmering silver dress that highlighted every graceful line of her body, and her confident laugh carried across the room, turning heads wherever she went. Pedro was not from a wealthy family. In contrast to Maria's opulence, his background was modest. He lived with his grandmother in a small apartment near the city's outskirts. He had saved every extra coin he could for months to buy a decent outfit, just to make sure he looked presentable tonight. In his mind, this party was the stage upon which he would finally gather the courage to confess his feelings for Maria. It was near midnight, and the party was in full swing. The music thumped, the chatter filled every corner, and the dance floor glowed with colorful lights. Pedro waited patiently, trying to time his approach so he could catch Maria alone. The perfect moment arrived when Maria took a break from dancing to grab a drink at one of the tables. Summoning his courage, Pedro approached her. "Hey," he started, voice trembling slightly. Maria turned, giving him a quick once-over. Pedro had always been quiet at school, just a face in the background. "Yes," she said, her voice direct yet cool. "I wanted to say happy birthday," he managed, holding out a small, wrapped box containing a modest necklace he had saved up to buy. Her reaction was not what he hoped. She forced a quick smile. "Thanks," she said, opening the box. The necklace was simple, a small pendant in the shape of a heart. It was nowhere near the opulence she was used to receiving from her wealthy circle. Her lips parted in a faint sign of disapproval, but she masked it, at least momentarily. Pedro decided this was his chance. "I know we don't talk much, but I've admired you for a while, and—" Before he could finish, a group of partygoers drifted closer, curious about Maria's reaction. Among them was Emily, who would one day become one of Pedro's best friends, but back then she was just another classmate in the crowd, observing quietly. Henry and Jenny were also around, both popular enough to be on Maria's guest list. They watched, intrigued. "Admired me?" Maria repeated. A small laugh escaped her lips, loud enough for her friends to hear. She glanced at the necklace again, then at Pedro's anxious expression. "Are you serious right now?" A hush fell over the immediate group, though laughter from the rest of the party continued in the background. Pedro's face flushed. I'm just trying to say." Maria raised a dismissive hand, cutting him off. "You think you can come here, give me this cheap little trinket, and what? Sweep me off my feet." Her laugh was sharper this time, echoing around them. "You're so out of your league, Pedro. Stick to your own world." A wave of shock passed through the small group. Even among Maria's closest friends, there was a moment of silent discomfort. Pedro stood there, feeling an icy stab of humiliation. He could see Emily shift awkwardly, her eyes full of empathy, but she didn't speak up. Henry and Jenny exchanged puzzled glances. The moment seemed to stretch on indefinitely. "Go home," Maria added in a voice that carried. "This party isn't for you." Pedro's eyes stung with tears that threatened to fall. Shaking, he turned on his heels and pushed through the partygoers, all of whom suddenly seemed to be watching. His humiliation was complete. He wanted to be anywhere but here. He didn't look back. He ran as fast as he could from that house, leaving behind not just the party, but his illusions. That night, he vowed never to let anyone tear down his dignity again. Though he had never considered revenge before, the seeds of bitterness took root in his heart. And so began Pedro's journey, a journey that would lead to a transformation no one could have predicted. 3 years passed. The memory of that humiliating night was a wound that still ached in Pedro's mind, but he used it as motivation. He threw himself into his studies, took on part-time jobs, and spent hours in the library devouring books on business, personal development, and self-improvement. Over time, he found a hidden reservoir of resilience that he hadn't known existed. His grandmother noticed a change in him. Although she never pressed for the details of what spurred his sudden dedication, she was proud. Pedro started investing in small online ventures, learning about dropshipping, web design, and digital marketing. Bit by bit, his financial situation improved. He bought better clothes, learned to style himself, and took up an exercise routine that built his confidence. He also maintained a close friendship with Emily, who reached out to him after the party to apologize for not speaking up on his behalf. Their bond grew stronger over the years. One day, scrolling through social media, Pedro saw an announcement that his old high school planned a grand reunion for ex-students. Immediately, the comments section lit up with excitement. "Can't wait to see everyone again. Is Maria going to be there?" I heard Pedro's totally different now. The mention of his name in the comment thread sparked curiosity in some, confusion in others. Pedro smiled. He was a changed man, inside and out, and this reunion would be the perfect opportunity to reveal that transformation, not out of vanity, but as a testament to how far he had come. Across town, Maria also saw the announcement. Her life had taken a dramatic turn after her father was arrested for financial crimes, which led to her family losing nearly all of their wealth. The grand house with the pool and landscaped garden was sold off to pay debts, and Maria was forced to move to a small village with her grandmother. Many of her old friends drifted away once her social status fell. When Maria read about the upcoming reunion, a pang of dread filled her. She wasn't the girl she used to be. Humiliation and hardship had taught her painful lessons, but part of her still wanted to attend, to reclaim some semblance of a life she once knew, even if it was only for one evening. She tried to bury the memory of what she had done to Pedro, but it still surfaced sometimes, reminding her of the cruelty she was once capable of. "Should I go?" she asked herself. She had no money for fancy clothes and barely anything for transportation. A small part of her considered the possibility that attending might help her make amends with the ghosts of her past, especially Pedro. And so, unknowingly, Pedro and Maria both made the decision to attend the reunion that would become a crucible for unresolved tensions and unexpected revelations. The day of the reunion dawned with a crisp morning sky. Pedro woke early, preparing for the long drive to his old high school. Now living in a better part of the city, he had the means to arrive in style. He made sure his car, a sleek, black luxury sedan, was polished to perfection. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, he adjusted his cuffs and put on a designer watch, a reward he had given himself after hitting certain business milestones. Emily was traveling with him. She had grown into a confident, determined young woman. Wearing a simple but elegant blue dress, she climbed into the passenger seat and gave Pedro a reassuring smile. "Ready?" she asked softly, aware of the emotional baggage this reunion represented. Pedro gripped the steering wheel for a second, took a steadying breath, and nodded. "Let's do this." The drive to the old school was filled with nostalgic conversation, both of them recalling funny incidents in class, favorite teachers, and not-so-favorite ones. Yet, beneath their reminiscences simmered the knowledge that they would soon encounter people who had once defined the social hierarchy of their teenage years. Pedro felt a flicker of anxiety, but he pushed it aside. He reminded himself of everything he had accomplished and of the confident person he had become. They arrived at the school's large parking lot, which was already filled with average cars belonging to other returning alumni. Their entrance did not go unnoticed. As Pedro's luxury sedan glided into a spot, conversations momentarily ceased, heads turned, and curious whispers rose among the clusters of former students milling about outside the school building. "Who is that?" someone murmured. "Oh my God, I think that's Pedro from our class," another said, voice laden with surprise. When Pedro stepped out, tall and poised, wearing that immaculate suit, it was as though a completely different person had shown up. Emily emerged next, equally composed, her arm gently linked with Pedro's. Both radiated a self-assured energy that was a stark contrast to the more timid student versions of themselves that people remembered. Henry, a former classmate who had remained somewhat neutral during the high school drama, approached with a big grin. He extended a hand. "Pedro, man, you look incredible. What happened to you all these years?" Pedro shook Henry's hand with a polite smile. "I grew up," he replied simply, letting his transformation speak for itself. Over Henry's shoulder, Pedro noticed a cluster of familiar faces, including Jenny, who was busy texting or scrolling through her phone. She looked up, did a double take, and walked over. "No way. This is insane," she exclaimed, glancing between Pedro and Emily. Emily smiled. "Time changes people, I guess." Meanwhile, not too far away, a small group parted to reveal Maria. She stood on the edge of the crowd, wearing a modest outfit, a simple blouse and slacks that looked well-maintained but nothing fancy. Her hair was tied back, and she carried herself with an uncharacteristic humility. The moment her gaze locked with Pedro's, a jolt of memory passed between them. That humiliating party from 3 years ago seemed to overshadow the present for a moment, bringing a slight tremor to both their hearts. Maria's mouth opened slightly, as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Pedro, on the other hand, chose not to walk toward her. The tumult of emotions, anger, triumph, pity, swirled in his mind. It was not the right moment. Instead, he turned away, continuing to greet other classmates. Inside the old-school gym, which had been decorated with banners, streamers, and pictures from their high school days, the atmosphere was electric with chatter. People caught up on each other's college experiences, careers, relationships, and everything in between. Yet, a subtle tension followed Pedro and Maria wherever they went. Everyone could sense it. Some older classmates knew what had transpired 3 years ago. Some only heard rumors, and others had no clue, but were drawn to the emotional undercurrent that swirled around them. Maria stayed on the periphery of the gym, fiddling nervously with a plastic cup of punch. She spotted a few acquaintances who greeted her politely, but didn't linger long in conversation. It was clear that she wasn't the center of attention anymore. The wealth, the social power she had wielded so easily before was gone. The reality was plain. She was alone, and she was realizing just how much she had taken for granted. Pedro, meanwhile, drifted through the crowd gracefully, occasionally glancing in Maria's direction. Emily and Henry stayed close to him, fielding questions and occasionally catching awkward looks from those who remembered the humiliating incident all too well. At some point, Henry pulled Pedro aside. "So, are you going to talk to her?" he asked quietly. Pedro stiffened slightly. "I don't know yet. Maybe. I need to see if she's the same person who—" He paused, the weight of the memory pressing down on him. Henry nodded. "Just remember, you might never get closure if you don't face it head-on." Pedro was about to respond when Emily joined them. "People are talking," she said in a low tone. "They want to know how you two will handle seeing each other again." "Let them talk," Pedro said, forcing a calmness into his voice that he didn't entirely feel. "I'll handle it in my own time." But destiny seemed to have its own agenda. Word spread that Maria's life had taken a drastic turn, that her father was in prison, that she was living in near poverty. Some classmates whispered about it in hushed tones, while others openly gossiped. The rumor eventually reached Pedro's ears through Jenny, who approached him with a curious expression. "Hey, so, I heard Maria's father was arrested, and she lost all her money," Jenny said, her voice a mix of shock and fascination. "She lives in a poor village, now with her grandmother. Did you know about that?" Pedro's expression tightened. Emily, standing beside him, immediately recognized the conflict raging in his eyes. He found it impossible to ignore a twinge of sympathy, no matter what Maria had done to him. But he also remembered how her cruelty had deeply wounded him, and possibly others. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know, but I'm not sure it changes anything. She was horrible to me, and to you, Emily, when times were good for her." Jenny nodded. "Well, it's pretty intense. Maybe she's changed." Pedro inhaled slowly. Yeah, maybe. The seeds of confrontation had been planted. All that remained was for them to sprout. As the reunion continued, a small group of classmates decided to head elsewhere for a late-night hangout after the official event ended. The tension between Pedro and Maria, and the swirling rumors of Maria's downfall, had left everyone hungry for more information. Jenny, fueled by curiosity, suggested they drive out to the village where Maria supposedly lived. Pedro, still grappling with his complicated feelings, hesitated. Yet something propelled him forward. Emily tried to dissuade Pedro from going. Are you sure about this? What if she doesn't want to talk? But Pedro, arms crossed over his chest, exhaled and said, I need to see her in that environment. I need to know if she understands what her actions did to me and to others. Henry and Jenny, intrigued and a bit nervous, volunteered to accompany them. Eventually, they all piled into Pedro's luxury sedan, 4 people with 4 different sets of emotions. The plan was simple: drive out to Maria's village, see her home, and perhaps talk to her if she agreed. It would be a confrontation with the past that had haunted all of them in some way. The drive from the school to Maria's village was longer than expected. The road wound through darkened stretches of forest, illuminated only by the headlights cutting through the darkness. A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the rhythmic hum of tires on pavement. Jenny eventually spoke up. It's kind of scary out here. Henry tried to lighten the mood. We used to say there were ghosts in these woods, remember? He chuckled awkwardly, glancing at Emily, who nodded absently. She was lost in thought, worrying about Pedro and how he might handle the confrontation. When they finally reached the village, it was after midnight. They passed rows of humble homes, some made of wood, some of stone, most looking old and in need of repair. The air felt different here, still, quiet, almost mournful. A stray dog barked in the distance. Windows were dark, and no one seemed to be moving around at this hour. Following a rough description from one of the other classmates, they found a small house enclosed by a rickety wooden fence. A single dim light shone through a window. An older woman, stooped with age, was standing on the porch, wiping her hands on a worn apron. Pedro got out of the car first, smoothing down his suit jacket, an incongruous figure of wealth in this modest setting. He approached the fence, Emily right behind him. Henry and Jenny followed, staying a few steps back. Hello, Pedro said softly, raising a hand in greeting. We're looking for Maria. We went to high school with her. The elderly woman gazed at them, her eyes wary yet polite. She's inside, she replied, stepping aside to let them pass. You can come in if you like. Crossing the threshold into the small house, Pedro felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest. The interior was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. The furniture was old, a faded sofa, a wooden table with peeling varnish, chairs that had seen better days. Then he saw Maria. She was sitting at a simple wooden chair in the small living room, knees pulled up to her chest, eyes wide in surprise. She was dressed casually, her hair unstyled. She looked vulnerable, like a completely different person from the one who had stood in that lavish party 3 years ago, mocking him in front of everyone. Pedro, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her face, noticing the faint lines of stress and sadness that had set in over the years. Emily stood beside him, her expression neutral but compassionate. Henry and Jenny remained near the door, uncertain whether they should stay or give the two some privacy. Maria's eyes darted around the room, as though looking for an escape. Why did you come here? She finally managed, her voice wavering. Pedro took a step closer, maintaining a respectful distance. Because I needed to see you. To see where life had taken you, after everything that happened. She swallowed hard. Well, now you know, she said, gesturing around the sparse living room. I have nothing left, Pedro. My father's in prison. We lost our home, our money, everything. Silence filled the air, thick with tension. Eventually, Emily spoke in a quiet, measured tone. It's not just about what you lost, Maria. It's also about what you did back then. To Pedro, to me, to other people. Maria's face crumpled, tears pooling in her eyes. You think I don't know? I regret it every single day. Behind them, Henry shifted uncomfortably. Jenny leaned against the wall, arms crossed, observing every moment. It was clear the words that needed to be exchanged were not easy for anyone. Pedro inhaled, focusing on keeping his voice steady. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made me feel worthless, like I was beneath you. And you did it all so casually. Maria nodded, tears now spilling down her cheeks. I was wrong. Horribly wrong. You were more than wrong, Pedro continued, fists tightening at his sides. You were cruel. You made me doubt my self-worth, and it took me years to rebuild my confidence. Emily took a step forward. And it wasn't just Pedro. You did things to me, to others you deemed unworthy. You spread rumors, made fun of the way I dressed, told lies about my mother. You knew exactly what you were doing. Maria looked away, unable to hold Emily's gaze. I know, she whispered. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that the person you saw back then, that's not who I am now. Pedro's breath hitched. Memories flooded back to him. The laughter, the stares, the sting of tears burning his eyes as he ran from the party. Now, he was standing in a home that was barely holding itself together, looking at a girl, no, a woman, who seemed utterly defeated. For a moment, Pedro felt the old anger flare up inside him. But he also felt something else, pity, or perhaps empathy. He remembered his own struggles, and how easy it was to get lost in despair. He remembered how it felt to be judged and belittled. He finally spoke again, voice subdued. If you're really sorry, you have to prove it, Maria. Apologies aren't enough. She nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. I know, she said. I want to make things right, but I don't know how. With that, the tension in the room eased, just slightly. Henry and Jenny exchanged glances, silently agreeing that it was probably time for them to slip out. They weren't sure if Pedro wanted them around for the deeper conversation that was bound to follow. The group stepped outside, giving Pedro and Maria a few minutes to talk in private. Emily lingered inside for a moment, torn between giving them space and wanting to support Pedro. Eventually, she too stepped out, leaving them alone with their pain and their past. Alone in that small, dim living room, Pedro and Maria let the silence stretch. It was a silence filled with regret on Maria's part and guarded caution on Pedro's. A single overhead light cast shadows against the walls, flickering slightly as though it might go out at any moment. You never really knew me, Pedro began softly, breaking the silence. All you ever saw was someone you could laugh at. Maria's voice was quivering. I was horrible, yes. I was insecure too. I thought my popularity and my father's money gave me worth. Putting people down made me feel powerful. She paused, glancing around the shabby room. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Now I'm the one with nothing. Pedro gave a humorless chuckle. Life has a way of teaching lessons. She nodded, biting her lower lip. I know. I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did to you and Emily. Trying would be a start, Pedro said. Look, I didn't come here to gloat or to enjoy your suffering. I came because I needed to see for myself if you had really changed. Her tear-streaked face turned up to meet his gaze. Have I? Pedro hesitated. I see that life has humbled you. Whether you've truly changed, that's something only your future actions can prove. Maria took a shuddering breath. Pedro, I've been thinking about trying to make amends. I'm trying to find a job, and I've considered volunteering somewhere to do some good for others. That's all I can really think of to start. That's better than nothing. He regarded her carefully, noticing how the arrogance she once exuded was replaced by genuine uncertainty. But if you're sincere, you need to talk to Emily too. You did a lot of damage there, especially when you spread rumors about her family. Maria's cheeks flushed with shame. I will, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I promise. For a moment, neither spoke. The rawness of the situation felt like an open wound. Eventually, Pedro stepped back. I should go. The others are waiting. Thank you for speaking with me. Maria stood up, her posture hesitant. Could you maybe come by again sometime? I'd like to talk more when we're not at a reunion or under these strange circumstances. Pedro considered it for a long moment. Maybe, he said finally. It was the closest he could come to an agreement, given the whirlwind of emotions inside him. He turned and walked out of the small house. The air outside felt fresher, as though the tightness in his chest had loosened slightly. Emily, Henry, and Jenny were standing by the car, talking in hushed tones. They paused when they saw Pedro emerge. How did it go? Emily asked quietly, searching his face for clues. It was intense, Pedro admitted. She apologized. Henry raised an eyebrow. Do you believe her? Pedro shook his head slightly. I'm not sure, but I think she's sincere about wanting to change. Whether that's enough, time will tell. Jenny stepped forward. So what's next? Pedro glanced back at the house, feeling an odd mix of relief, sadness, and lingering anger. I guess we give her a chance to prove herself. Meanwhile, let's head back. The four of them piled into the sedan and drove away, leaving the small village and Maria's humble home behind. But in truth, Pedro wasn't leaving anything behind. He was carrying new emotions and questions with him, uncertain of where they would lead. The following weeks were a mixture of introspection and slow-moving daily life. Pedro returned to his busy schedule, juggling his business endeavors and the occasional motivational talk he gave at local community centers. Emily continued her psychology studies, often discussing with Pedro the various facets of bullying, trauma, and redemption. Henry and Jenny went back to their routines, though they remained curious about Maria's situation. Meanwhile, in the modest village, Maria began taking small steps toward rebuilding her life. With her grandmother's encouragement, she applied for a job at a local grocery store, run by a gruff but kind-hearted older man named Señor Augusto. At first, he was reluctant to hire someone who had no prior experience and whose family name was still whispered about in scandalous tones. But Maria's earnestness, coupled with her grandmother's plea, finally convinced him. Working at the grocery store was a humbling experience. Maria was responsible for stocking shelves, cleaning aisles, and occasionally running the register when Señor Augusto needed a break. She struggled at first. Her feet ached from standing all day, and her back hurt from lifting boxes. But she found a peculiar sense of satisfaction at the end of each shift, knowing she had made an honest effort. One late afternoon, as she was wiping down the store counter, she heard the bell above the door jingle. To her surprise, Emily walked in. Maria froze, her heart pounding. She and Emily had not spoken directly since that night in Maria's home. Emily approached cautiously, aware of the odd looks from some regular customers. "Hi, Maria," she said gently, offering a small smile. Maria forced a smile in return, feeling self-conscious in her plain uniform. "Emily, hi. What are you doing here?" "I heard you might be working here," Emily replied, stepping aside to let another customer pass. "Thought I'd drop by and say hello." Maria swallowed, her eyes flicking to the floor. "It's a bit of a change from the life I used to have." Emily nodded, scanning the shelves of canned goods. Change isn't always a bad thing. They stood there in silence for a moment, the tension thick. Finally, Emily spoke again, lowering her voice so as not to be overheard. "Look, I wanted to say something. I appreciate your apology, and I know how hard it can be to take responsibility for what you did." Maria's throat felt tight. "Thank you for acknowledging that. I'm trying, Emily. I really am." Emily's expression softened. "I can see that. It's not easy to start over, especially with the weight of the past on your shoulders." A flicker of hope sparked in Maria's chest. "I know it might be too soon to ask for forgiveness, but—" Emily placed a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "It'll take time, but I'm willing to see where this goes. The fact that you're working here, humbling yourself, it shows effort. Keep it up." Maria's eyes welled with gratitude. "I will," she whispered. Emily smiled, stepping back. "I'll be around. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything, okay?" Maria nodded, a lump in her throat making it hard to speak. She watched Emily exit the store, the bell ringing once more. A small sense of relief washed over her. Perhaps there was a path toward redemption, and maybe it wasn't completely closed off. A few days later, Pedro was finishing a lecture at a local community center. He often spoke about bullying, self-esteem, and how he overcame his own struggles. His talks had begun to draw a decent crowd, parents, students, and local business owners who found inspiration in his journey from humiliation to success. After wrapping up his talk, Pedro was approached by a tall, broad-shouldered man with a warm smile. "Pedro, right? My name is Lucas. I run a youth mentorship program in the area. Could I speak with you for a minute?" Pedro extended a hand. "Of course, Lucas. Great to meet you." Lucas explained that he managed a small after-school program that helped disadvantaged teenagers stay out of trouble by teaching them practical skills and life lessons. He'd heard about Pedro's motivational talks and hoped Pedro might visit to share his story with the teens. "I'd love to," Pedro said, genuinely enthusiastic. Anything to help kids who might feel overshadowed or bullied. That very week, Pedro found himself in a modest community hall, standing before a group of about 20 teenagers. Many looked skeptical or bored, but a few gazed at him with curiosity. He spoke from the heart, detailing how he once felt powerless and humiliated, how that pain fueled his drive to succeed, and how he learned to channel anger into something productive. As he finished, the room burst into applause, some polite, some genuinely moved. One young girl named Raquel approached him, eyes shining. "Thank you for sharing your story. It's so hard sometimes, but hearing you makes me feel like I can find a way out of my situation." Pedro knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "You can. It doesn't matter what people say or do. What matters is how you use those experiences to grow." Word of Pedro's involvement with the youth program spread around the local community. Soon, Emily joined him on several visits, offering her growing expertise in psychology. Henry donated supplies to the center, and Jenny organized fundraising events. Gradually, their circle of friends began to revolve around more positive endeavors. Maria heard about Pedro's involvement from a newspaper article pinned on the grocery store bulletin board. Reading how Pedro had become a local hero of sorts, speaking out against bullying, gave her a strange mix of guilt and admiration. She remembered how she used to tear people down to build herself up. Now, the very person she had humiliated was inspiring others. That evening, Maria returned home from work to find her grandmother resting in a worn armchair. The old woman smiled. "You look tired, dear." Maria sighed, placing a small bag of groceries on the kitchen table. "It was a long day, but at least I'm working." Her grandmother reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you, Maria. No matter what happens, remember that we can always make good choices moving forward." Maria nodded, feeling a swell of emotion. She recalled Emily's visit and how a small bridge had been built between them. She thought about Pedro's motivational talks and how he had transformed his humiliation into something beneficial for others. I want to talk to Pedro again. Maybe see if there's a way for me to volunteer too, or do something meaningful," she finally said. Her grandmother's eyes lit up. "That would be a wonderful idea. Helping others helps us heal ourselves." A few weeks later, Maria decided to seek out the community center where Pedro and Emily volunteered. She felt a knot of nerves in her stomach as she boarded the worn-out bus that made the trip to the city. She had meticulously saved enough money for the bus fare, skipping a few minor comforts so she could afford the ride. Stepping off the bus, she clutched her purse and followed the directions she had scribbled on a piece of paper. The community center was an unassuming building with a green roof, sandwiched between a small library and a row of storefronts. Children and teenagers milled about, laughing and talking, while a few adults supervised. Maria hovered near the entrance, unsure of how to proceed. Then she spotted Lucas, who had become a familiar face in the local news, largely thanks to Pedro's efforts. Summoning her courage, Maria approached him. "Hi," she said quietly. "I'm Maria. I wanted to see if Pedro or Emily were around." Lucas gave her a friendly, if somewhat cautious, smile. "Maria, right? I think Emily is inside working on an activity schedule, and Pedro is probably helping some students with a project in the back room." Maria's gaze shifted toward the doorway, fear mingling with determination. "Would it be okay if I go in?" Lucas nodded, stepping aside. "Sure, but just to let you know, the kids here have been through a lot. Pedro's done a great job showing them that bullying can be overcome, so we take a pretty strong stance against any negativity." "Understood." She felt a pang of guilt at his words, but she returned the nod. "Understood." Inside, the community center bustled with activity. Colorful drawings lined the walls, and several folding tables were set up where kids were working on crafts or homework. The buzz of chatter and laughter was uplifting. As Maria weaved through the crowds, she caught a glimpse of Emily at a table, helping a young boy with a puzzle. Maria paused a moment, gathering her nerve before walking over. Emily glanced up, surprise flickering across her face. "Maria? What are you doing here?" Maria fiddled with the strap of her purse. "I heard about the work you and Pedro have been doing. I wanted to see if I could help." She met Emily's gaze, her voice wavering with sincerity. "I'm really trying to be a better person." Emily studied her for a long moment, as though searching for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded toward a seat. "Why don't you sit down? I'm helping Tiago with this puzzle. Then maybe we can talk." Relief washed over Maria. She slid into the chair, greeting the young boy with a shy smile, and gently took a piece of the puzzle to fit it into the emerging picture. Emily observed quietly, occasionally offering guidance to Tiago, who beamed at both of them whenever he found a matching piece. Across the room, Pedro was showing another group of teens how to create simple websites for small local businesses. He was so engrossed in teaching that he didn't notice Maria's arrival. When he finally took a break and turned around, his eyes fell on Maria sitting with Emily at the puzzle table. His heart skipped a beat. He approached slowly, not wanting to cause a scene. Maria, sensing his presence, looked up. Their eyes locked, and the hush that fell between them seemed to slow time within the busy center. "I didn't expect to see you here," Pedro said, choosing his words carefully. There was neither accusation nor welcome in his tone, just a guarded neutrality. Maria stood, wringing her hands. "I know you didn't, but I wanted to come. To volunteer, if that's possible. I want to help." Emily stood as well, stepping between them as if to mediate. "She's been sitting with Tiago, helping him with his puzzle. She seems genuine, Pedro." Pedro's gaze flicked to Emily, then back to Maria. Finally, he sighed. "If you really want to volunteer, you'll have to talk to Lucas about signing up for a slot. But if at any point I see you undermining what we do here—" "I won't," Maria interjected, her voice firm with conviction. "This is important to me. More than you know." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Okay, let's see how it goes." Maria released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her shoulders slumping with relief. She returned to the puzzle table, kneeling beside Tiago and pointing out where a missing corner piece might fit. For the first time in a long time, Maria felt a sense of possibility. She wasn't sure if she would ever fully heal the wound she had inflicted, but at least she was taking the first steps toward trying. Several weeks passed, and Maria became a regular volunteer at the community center. She cleaned up after activities, helped kids with homework, and even offered to organize small fundraising events, drawing on some of her past social connections. Though some people were suspicious of her motives, she persisted, showing up on time and working diligently. In the process, Maria befriended Helena, a kind-hearted retiree who volunteered as a tutor. Helena had watched the dynamics between Pedro, Emily, and Maria with quiet curiosity. One afternoon, Helena gently pulled Maria aside. "You've got your work cut out for you, dear," she said, eyes crinkling kindly. "People don't forget easily, but I see how hard you're trying." Maria nodded. "I appreciate that. Every day I'm here, I realize how important it is to give, instead of just taking." Helena patted her arm. "Keep it up. Actions speak louder than words." But not everything was smooth sailing. Some of the teenagers recognized Maria from social media posts and old gossip. A few whispered about her scandal-ridden father, about how she used to bully people. Word reached a teen named Jonas, who was protective of Pedro after hearing his story of humiliation. Jonas openly challenged Maria one day in front of other volunteers. "I know who you are," Jonas said, glaring at her. "You used to pick on people, right? Now you think you can just come here and pretend to be all nice." Maria felt her stomach twist. "I'm not pretending," she managed. "I messed up in the past, and I'm trying to do better." Jonas scoffed, crossing his arms. "People like you don't change. You just want to make yourself look good." A hush fell over the surrounding kids, who watched with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Maria's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "I understand why you'd say that, but I'm not leaving. I'm here to help." The tension escalated until Pedro arrived. He placed a hand on Jonas's shoulder. "Hey, let's calm down, all right? Maria has been working hard here. If she slips up or goes back to old habits, we'll deal with it. But until then, let's give her a chance. Jonas looked conflicted, then shrugged off Pedro's hand. Fine, he muttered, turning away. But the look in his eyes said he was unconvinced. Maria cast Pedro a grateful glance, but his expression remained neutral. She realized that the road to redemption would be fraught with resistance, and not just from Pedro or Emily, but from anyone who believed she couldn't change. In an effort to raise more funds for the mentorship program, Lucas decided to host a small benefit gala at a local event hall. It was an ambitious endeavor. Local artists would donate paintings, local musicians would perform, and tickets would be sold to the public to raise money for new computers, sports equipment, and educational trips. Maria volunteered to help with the organization, using her flair for planning that once manifested in elaborate parties of the past. She brainstormed themes, coordinated decorations, and even reached out to some acquaintances from her old life who might be willing to sponsor or donate items for auction. Pedro, meanwhile, handled the logistics and financials of the event, ensuring every donation was properly accounted for. The night of the gala arrived. Emily wore a graceful lilac dress, while Pedro opted for another expertly tailored suit. Maria dressed modestly yet tastefully, wearing a simple black dress that she had carefully saved up for over the past weeks. Henry and Jenny also came, greeting guests and helping direct them toward the buffet tables and auction area. The hall buzzed with conversation, live jazz music drifting through the room. Paintings were displayed on easels, each with a bidding sheet. There was an air of excitement mingled with anticipation. Would the event be successful enough to sustain the mentorship program for another year? Throughout the evening, Maria found herself in constant motion, checking on caterers, conversing with guests, and politely encouraging them to bid on items. She was surprised to see some faces from her old circle, people who had once flocked to her parties for the free food and high-end atmosphere. A few recognized her, giving her questioning looks. How did the once spoiled Maria end up organizing a charity gala? As she dashed past one of these acquaintances, a woman named Clarissa called out, "Maria, darling, is that you?" Maria forced a smile. "Hi, Clarissa. Long time no see." Clarissa's eyes flicked over Maria's simple dress and the volunteer badge she wore. "I heard about what happened. Your father, it's such a shame." Maria nodded, pressing her lips tightly. "It is, but I'm moving forward now." Clarissa gave her a tepid nod. "Well, best of luck with this project." Her words were laced with condescension, as though volunteering was beneath her. Maria clenched her fists, discreetly, but maintained a polite smile. "Thank you. Enjoy the gala." She spun on her heel, heading for the other side of the room. She glanced around for Pedro, eventually spotting him near the stage, where a local jazz band was performing. He was talking animatedly with Lucas and a potential sponsor. Emily stood close by, scanning the crowd with a satisfied smile. Maria allowed herself a moment to breathe, feeling a sense of pride in the event's success so far. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the buffet table. Jonas, the teen who had confronted Maria, was in a heated argument with another boy. Drinks toppled as they shoved each other. Without hesitation, Pedro and Henry rushed over to intervene, separating the two teens. Emily joined them, speaking calmly to diffuse the tension. Maria hurried toward the scene, heart pounding. She arrived just in time to hear Jonas shouting at the other boy about some perceived insult. Through the chaos, she caught fragments of what happened apparently. The other boy made a snide remark about Jonas's broken family situation, triggering Jonas's anger. Seizing her chance, Maria stepped in. "Jonas, calm down. Hurting each other won't solve anything." Jonas glared at her, tears of rage in his eyes. "What do you care? You used to be just like him, picking on people." Maria took a deep breath, ignoring the onlookers who had paused their conversations to watch the scuffle. "I know, and I was wrong. That's exactly why I'm telling you it's not worth it. Words can hurt, but violence only makes it worse." Jonas's fists loosened, though he still looked furious. Pedro placed a hand gently on the teen's shoulder, guiding him away from the buffet table. Emily spoke quietly to the other boy, ensuring he understood the gravity of his words. Eventually, the tension dissipated, and the gala returned to its previous hum of activity. Jonas stayed by Pedro's side, breathing heavily, while Maria hovered nearby. After a moment, Jonas looked up at her and muttered, "Thanks, I guess." Maria offered him a small smile. "Anytime." Pedro watched the exchange with a thoughtful expression. It was a small thing, but it showcased Maria's growing ability to empathize instead of belittle. Perhaps she really was Chong. As the night went on, the gala proved to be a resounding success. People were bidding generously on the art pieces, and donations poured in from various local businesses. Just before the final speech, Lucas took to the stage and thanked everyone for their support. He then invited Pedro to say a few words, given how instrumental Pedro had been to the program's expansion. A round of applause followed as Pedro ascended to the microphone. He glanced around the room, spotting Emily, Henry, Jenny, Lucas, and finally Maria, who was standing near the back, watching quietly. "Thank you all for being here," Pedro began, his voice resonating with the confidence he had gained over the years. "The mentorship program here does more than just keep kids off the streets. It gives them hope, a safe space, and the chance to dream bigger than their circumstances. I know what it's like to feel powerless, to believe you have no value, but with the right support, we can change any story." The audience applauded. Pedro continued, "Tonight isn't about me. It's about the kids who benefit from what we do here. But I also want to acknowledge that I didn't do this alone. There are so many volunteers who make this work possible, including some who may surprise you." A hush fell, and Maria felt her heart flutter in her chest, certain that Pedro was referring to her. Pedro smiled, though not directly at her. "We all carry our past with us, and sometimes we make mistakes, big ones. But tonight, I've seen what real change can look like. I want everyone here to know that redemption is possible for anyone who's willing to do the work." He wrapped up his speech with a final thanks, and the room erupted in applause. Maria felt tears prick her eyes, a complex mixture of gratitude, shame, and longing. When the crowd dispersed to continue mingling, she approached Pedro by the stage. "That was a beautiful speech," she said softly. "And thank you for believing that people can change. I'm trying to prove that every day." Pedro regarded her, his eyes reflecting a gentler warmth than before. "I see that," he replied. "You've stepped up in ways I never thought you would." Maria swallowed. I want to thank you for not shutting me out when I asked to volunteer." Pedro nodded. "I didn't do it for you, Maria. I did it because I believe in second chances. But I am glad you're taking it seriously." His gaze flicked over the crowd. "All these people, they're here because they want a brighter future for these kids. Remember that." She nodded, suddenly feeling lighter. "I will. Thank you, Pedro." Though the path to fully healing the wounds of the past was still uncertain, this moment signified a turning point. Maria sensed that while Pedro may never forget the humiliation she once subjected him to, he was at least open to the possibility of coexistence, maybe even respect. Just as life seemed to be aligning positively, a new challenge emerged. Maria's father, who had been in prison for financial crimes, was rumored to be seeking an appeal. Whispers circulated that he might have stashed some funds away, enough to hire a top-notch lawyer. The thought of her father re-entering her life filled Maria with dread. She was still grappling with the aftermath of his actions and the damage they had caused. News of this potential appeal spread among those who had followed the high-profile case years ago. Some people in the village pointed accusing fingers at Maria, accusing her of secretly helping her father. Others worried that if her father regained his freedom, he might revert to his old manipulative ways. The rumor reached Pedro's ears too. Jenny mentioned it over coffee one afternoon. "Have you heard? Maria's father might get out on appeal. People are saying all kinds of things, that maybe Maria is backing him." Pedro frowned, setting down his cup. "That doesn't sound right. Maria seems sincere about wanting a clean break from her old life." Jenny shrugged. "I'm just telling you what's being whispered around. You know how gossip works." That evening, Pedro decided to talk to Maria directly. He found her at the community center, helping Emily clean up after an art activity. Once the kids had left, and it was just the volunteers in the big hall, Pedro approached her. I've heard some rumors about your father's appeal, he began, watching for her reaction. Is there any truth to them? Maria tensed visibly, setting down the box of crayons she was sorting. I don't know much more than you do. I heard he's trying for an appeal, but I'm not involved. I haven't even visited him in prison. Emily wiped her hands on a towel, glancing sympathetically at Maria. I know this can't be easy for you. Maria closed her eyes, letting out a tremulous breath. It's not. People keep accusing me of wanting to get our old life back, but I don't. That life was toxic. The money, the parties, the shallow friendships, it all led to this mess. I never want to go back. Pedro studied her earnest face. I believe you, but you know that if your father does get out, he might try to pull you back into that lifestyle, right? You'll have to stand firm. Maria nodded, her voice trembling. I will. I'm done being under his control. Though she sounded resolute, Maria couldn't shake the fear that her father's possible release might derail all the progress she had made. Late at night, she found herself lying awake, haunted by nightmares of returning to that hollow, self-absorbed life. She had to focus on the good she was doing now, on the genuine friendships she was cultivating with Emily and the other volunteers, on the respect she was slowly earning from Pedro. Clutching her blanket tight, she vowed not to let her father's shadow overtake her again. Despite the swirling rumors about her father, Maria pressed on. She continued volunteering at the community center, engaged in more honest conversations with people she once scorned, and made tangible efforts to support the kids in the program. Her grandmother's health had taken a slight turn for the worse, adding another layer of worry, but Maria remained steadfast in her resolve to change. One rainy afternoon, Pedro found himself driving to the village again. He had arranged to pick up some donated goods from a local farmer who wanted to support the mentorship program. As he navigated the muddy roads, he noticed Maria walking along the side of the street, holding a small umbrella. Pulling up beside her, he rolled down the window. Need a ride? He called, rain drizzling onto his sleeve. Maria hesitated, then nodded. Yes, please. It's pouring out here. She climbed into the passenger seat, water dripping from her umbrella. Pedro handed her a tissue. Where are you headed? Just home, she replied, folding the wet umbrella carefully on the floor. I was at the pharmacy picking up some medication for my grandmother. Pedro nodded, putting the car in drive. For a few moments, they rode in silence, the rhythmic patter of rain on the windshield filling the car. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice subdued. Thank you for not judging me about my father. Pedro kept his eyes on the road. I can't blame you for his actions. You're your own person, but I hope you'll stay true to this path you're on, no matter what happens. She pressed her lips together, nodding slowly. I will. There's no going back for me. They pulled up to Maria's small house. She hesitated before opening the car door, as though mustering the courage to say something. Pedro, wait. I realize I might never fully undo what I did to you, but if there's anything else I can do to make amends, to prove that I'm not just putting on a show, please tell me. Pedro turned off the engine, looking at her intently. I think it'll take time for both of us, especially me, to truly heal from what happened. I appreciate what you're doing now, but I won't lie. Sometimes I still remember that party, and it hurts. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I'm so sorry. He nodded, a faint sadness in his voice. I know, but redemption is a journey, not a moment. Keep going. Maria smiled through her tears. Thank you. With that, she slipped out of the car and hurried inside, the rain soaking her shoes as she ran. Pedro watched her go, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. Sympathy, lingering pain, cautious hope. Only time would tell if Maria's transformation was permanent, but for now, he saw a glimmer of genuine change. Encouraged by her progress, Maria decided to take another bold step, reaching out to other classmates she had wronged. She painstakingly compiled a list of people she had bullied or hurt through rumors. It wasn't short. At first, she felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of people she had to face. She wrote heartfelt letters to some, while scheduling face-to-face meetings with others, if they were willing. Some responded with anger, telling her they wanted nothing to do with her. Others met her with skepticism, suspecting she had ulterior motives. But a few, like a girl named Carolina, whom Maria had tormented for her weight issues, expressed cautious optimism. Carolina met Maria at a small cafe near the town center. Maria arrived early, hands trembling around a cup of green tea. When Carolina walked in, Maria stood up, offering a tentative smile. "Hey, thanks for meeting with me," Maria said. Carolina nodded stiffly. "Sure. I was curious what you had to say." Maria took a deep breath. "I want to apologize. In high school, I was awful to you. I bullied you about your weight and spread cruel jokes. It was inexcusable." Carolina pursed her lips, crossing her arms. "It really hurt me, you know. I struggled a lot with self-esteem. I even considered changing schools because of how you and your friends treated me." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. I can't change what I did, but I'm trying to be a better person. I hope you can at least see that I'm genuine." Carolina studied her for a long moment. "I can see that you're remorseful. Whether I can forgive you or not, that might take time. But I appreciate you reaching out." Maria nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. "I understand. Thank you for listening." They parted ways on cordial, if not entirely friendly terms. But Maria took it as a victory. Each time she faced someone she had wronged, owned up to her actions, and asked for their forgiveness, she felt a little lighter. She also felt more determined than ever to ensure she never reverted to the person she once was. Meanwhile, Emily was on the cusp of a significant milestone. She was about to finish her psychology degree. For her final project, she had chosen to research the long-term effects of bullying on both the victim and the bully, inspired by her own experiences and by Pedro's transformation. The project involved interviews and case studies of individuals who had experienced bullying in various roles. One day, Maria was tidying up after an art session at the community center when Emily approached her, holding a digital recorder. "Hey, Maria, could I ask you something related to my thesis?" Maria blinked, setting down a stack of drawing paper. "Sure." Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I'm doing a section on the bully's perspective, why they did it, how they felt afterward, if they ever regretted it, how they changed. Would you be willing to do an interview?" Maria felt her pulse quicken. Part of her feared reliving those memories in detail, but another part recognized that it might be therapeutic, as well as helpful to Emily's research. "Yes," she finally said, voice shaking slightly. "I'll do it." They scheduled a private session in one of the smaller rooms of the community center. Emily set up a recorder, then sat across from Maria at a simple wooden table. The air was thick with anticipation. When Emily finally pressed the record button, her voice was calm and professional. "Interview with Maria, former classmate and reformed bully." Emily began. "Maria, could you tell me when you first realized you were bullying others?" Maria swallowed hard. I always knew, but it became really clear in high school when I started spreading rumors, mocking people's looks, clothes, family situations. It escalated at my 17th birthday party, especially with Pedro." Emily nodded, glancing at her notes. "What motivated you to do these things?" Maria paused, tears threatening to well up. "I felt powerful. My father had money. I had popularity. And it made me feel invincible. Deep down, I was also very insecure. If I put others down, I didn't have to face my own flaws." They continued, discussing Maria's darkest moments, how she humiliated Pedro, how she drove Emily to tears with rumors about her mother, how she formed cliques that excluded and mocked others. Maria didn't hold back, describing in painful detail the mindset she had at the time. Finally, Emily asked the hardest question. "Do you think you can ever make amends for all you did?" Maria wiped a tear from her cheek. "I don't know if I can make full amends. I can only try, day by day, to be different, to help rather than hurt. It might never be enough, but it's what I have." Emily pressed stop on the recorder, her eyes moist with tears as well. "Thank you for sharing all of that, Maria. This will help my research immensely." Maria exhaled a shaky breath. "It was hard, but I'm glad I did it. I hope it helps someone else, if nothing else." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the interview hanging in the air. Then Emily reached out and squeezed Maria's hand. It was a gesture that conveyed both empathy and a shared pain that had, in some ways, forged a new understanding between them. Just as Maria was feeling a sense of progress, the legal system gave an unexpected ruling. Her father's appeal was successful, and he would be released from prison pending a new trial. The news spread like wildfire through the village. Some people murmured that Maria's old life would resurface, that she'd inevitably be pulled back into the world of wealth and arrogance. Fear gnawed at Maria. She remembered the controlling ways of her father, the constant push for social standing, the manipulation of people's fears and vulnerabilities. Would she be strong enough to resist him now? The day he walked out of the prison gates, wearing a crisp suit that hinted at hidden resources, Maria felt an old dread coil in the pit of her stomach. He arrived at her grandmother's house unannounced, stepping out of a sleek black car. Maria's grandmother, frail and resting in her chair, barely managed a greeting. "Hello, daughter," her father said, a thin smile on his face. Maria felt her heart pound. "What are you doing here?" He spread his hands, gesturing to the modest home. "Where else would I go? My own daughter can't shut me out, can she?" She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to maintain composure. "Dad, I'm not living that life anymore." He scoffed. "I heard you've been volunteering at some children's center, dealing with petty problems. That's all well and good, but now that I'm out, we can rebuild. We can regain our rightful status." Maria shook her head vehemently. "I don't want that. I'm happier now, doing honest work, helping people." His eyes flashed with an anger she knew too well. "Don't be ridiculous. We come from a lineage of success. People look up to us. We can have it all again, money, influence, everything." She squared her shoulders. "That everything ruined our family. You ended up in prison, and I hurt so many people. I'm done with that." Her father's hand twitched, as though he wanted to grab her by the arm. Instead, he took a step back, cold composure returning. "Fine," he said in a controlled tone. "Have your moment of moral high ground. But remember this, money talks. When I regain my fortune, don't come crawling to me, asking for a piece of it." He turned on his heel and walked away, slamming the door behind him. Maria sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother beckoned her closer, wrapping an arm around her trembling shoulders. "He won't change," the old woman murmured, sadness in her eyes. Maria nodded, sobbing softly. "I know, but I won't let him ruin everything I've built." Her father's sudden return cast a shadow over Maria's newfound stability. The next morning, she dragged herself to the grocery store where she still worked part-time, the conversation with her father replaying in her mind. While unpacking boxes of produce, she overheard two co-workers gossiping in hushed tones. "Did you hear Maria's dad is back? Bet she'll quit soon and go back to living in some fancy place." "Yeah, she won't last here. People like her never truly change." Maria gripped the edge of a wooden crate, forcing down a wave of despair. She reminded herself of Pedro's words. Redemption is a journey, not a moment. She wouldn't let rumors and doubts derail her. She had come too far. At the community center later that day, she found Pedro, Emily, and Lucas discussing the next big project, a series of workshops on entrepreneurship designed to give teens practical skills they could use to start small businesses or freelance gigs. "We could really use your input, Maria," Lucas said. "You have a knack for organizing and outreach, plus you know people in different circles." Maria blinked in surprise. "You're trusting me with that?" Pedro gave a slight nod, though his expression remained guarded. "You've done well so far. Let's see if you can handle more responsibility." Touched by their confidence in her, Maria agreed. She threw herself into planning, calling local businesses for sponsorships, creating flyers, and even arranging for a local internet cafe owner to offer free training sessions for the teens. Yet as she pushed forward, the looming presence of her father weighed on her. Rumors circulated that he was trying to track down old connections in politics and finance to restore his reputation. One evening, she even found a business card slipped under her door, a high-profile lawyer's name and number scrawled across it, presumably left by her father. She confided in Emily about her fears. "I'm scared he'll do something drastic, or that he'll show up at one of our events and cause a scene." Emily placed a comforting hand on Maria's shoulder. "We'll handle it if it happens. You're not alone in this." That simple reassurance gave Maria strength. She continued her work, striving to prove, not just to Pedro and Emily, but to herself, that she could withstand her father's manipulations and remain true to the person she was becoming. The day of the entrepreneurship workshop arrived, bringing a surge of excitement to the community center. Teens bustled around, setting up tables, computers, and display boards. Lucas greeted visitors at the door, handing out brochures. Emily was in one corner, discussing psychological resilience with a group of interested parents. Pedro was in another room, demonstrating how to build a simple online store. Maria coordinated the event's flow from a central desk, wearing a neatly pressed blouse and slacks. She ensured each workshop had enough materials and that every visitor felt welcomed. The air hummed with possibility, a testament to the progress the center had made. Then, in the middle of the afternoon, Maria's father arrived. He strode through the front doors in a tailored suit, exuding the same self-assured aura he had displayed before his incarceration. Heads turned, and a hush fell over portions of the room. Maria froze at her desk, panic rushing through her veins. Spotting her, he marched over. "We need to talk," he said, voice loud enough to attract attention. Lucas stepped forward, frowning. "Sir, if you're here for the workshop, you can sign in at the front." Her father ignored Lucas, focusing on Maria. "You won't answer my calls." "Why?" "We have unfinished business." Maria's cheeks flamed with embarrassment. "I told you. I'm not interested in going back to that life." He smirked, eyeing the community center's humble decor. "This is your big dream. Handouts and naive do-gooders? Maria, you're my daughter. You belong with me, not with these." "Stop," she hissed, voice trembling. "This place is helping people. I'm helping people. That's more than you've ever done." By now, a crowd had formed. Pedro, drawn by the commotion, approached with measured steps. Emily hovered behind him, concern etched on her features. Maria's father looked at Pedro, recognition flickering across his features. "Ah, the boy my daughter used to make fun of," he sneered. "Now you're a big shot around here." Pedro's jaw tightened. "I won't let you insult Maria or this place." Her father scoffed. "You can't stop me. And you," he turned to Maria, "you think you can escape your family name? I can rebuild our empire. We can have influence again. Don't waste your time here, pandering to the weak." Before Maria could respond, Jonas, standing nearby, stepped forward, hands balled into fists. "We're not weak," he said, glaring up at Maria's father. "We're trying to do something positive with our lives. At least we're not criminals." A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the bystanders. Maria's father bristled, raising a hand as though to strike Jonas. Pedro quickly intervened, placing himself between them. "Don't you dare," he growled. "If you lay a hand on any kid here, I'll call the police." Lucas and Henry moved in, ushering the curious teens away from the brewing confrontation. Emily guided some of the workshop visitors toward another room, trying to keep the event running smoothly despite the disruption. Maria's father glared at Pedro, then at Maria. "Fine. Stay here in this pathetic excuse for a community center. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've thrown away." He turned, storming out through the doors as dramatically as he had entered, leaving an unnerving silence behind. Maria stood, shaking from head to toe. She felt both humiliation and a spark of furious determination. This was her father's way, belittling and intimidating, but for the first time, she hadn't crumbled. Pedro exhaled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I'm fine. Let's just keep this workshop going." Emily offered a small, supportive smile. "We're here for you." The event continued, albeit with a lingering tension in the air. Yet, in the midst of the turmoil, Maria felt a strange sense of relief. She had stood up to her father in front of everyone, refusing to be bullied back into her old life. It was a public declaration of who she was trying to become, and she intended to see it through. As the aftermath of her father's confrontation slowly faded, Maria found herself surrounded by a network of support she never expected to have. The volunteers at the community center, the teens, and even the once wary staff at the grocery store started treating her with more warmth. In the weeks following the workshop, Maria and Pedro found themselves working side by side more often. Whether it was planning future events, transporting donated goods, or brainstorming new ideas for the mentorship program, they spent long hours together. Sometimes, they even shared quiet moments reminiscing about high school, its ironies and its lessons. One evening, after they finished distributing flyers for an upcoming fundraiser, Pedro offered to drive Maria back home. The sky was tinged with the soft pinks and purples of dusk, and a gentle summer breeze drifted through the car's open windows. As they neared her grandmother's house, Maria gazed out at the passing fields. "I never really said it properly, but thank you for giving me a chance to redeem myself here." Pedro's grip on the steering wheel softened. "You earned that chance. You're the one who kept showing up." She glanced at him, her expression delicate. "And about that night at my birthday party, I know I apologized, but I want to say it again. I'm sorry for how I hurt you. I hope I can continue to prove I'm not that person anymore." Pedro slowed the car, parking near her gate. He turned to face her, the lingering sunset casting warm hues across their faces. "I'll admit, the memory still stings. But I see what you're doing now, and it means a lot. If you keep this up, I think we can finally put the past behind us." They shared a gentle smile, one filled with respect, shared memories, and the faint promise of something new. For a moment, the air felt lighter, the baggage of the past loosening its grip. Maria's grandmother waved from the porch. Maria unbuckled her seatbelt, pausing before opening the door. "Thank you again," she whispered, stepping out into the twilight. Pedro watched her walk up to the house, something akin to admiration stirring within him. He drove away feeling an unexpected glow, realizing that perhaps, for the first time, he and Maria were on the same page, moving away from hatred and toward understanding. Months turned into a year, and the changes Maria had made in her life continued to flourish. She maintained her job at the grocery store, helping Senor Augusto expand his business by introducing new products and occasionally organizing promotional events. She stayed active at the community center, even spearheading a new mentorship program for young girls, focusing on building self-esteem and avoiding the pitfalls of bullying. Her father's attempts at restoring his empire stalled. Legal complications and a lack of genuine allies made his path difficult. Occasionally, he sent messages to Maria through mutual contacts, offering her money or a way out of her current life. She never responded. Eventually, the messages stopped. Whether he had given up or moved on, she did not know, and she chose not to dwell on it. Pedro's business ventures thrived. His motivational talks and workshops gained enough attention that he was invited to speak at conferences and schools beyond their region. Emily completed her psychology degree, graduating with honors, and began working on a book that documented stories of overcoming bullying, from both the victims and the bullies' perspectives. At the community center's year-end celebration, a new tradition was born, the Resilience Award, given to individuals who demonstrated remarkable growth, compassion, or support within the community. To Maria's shock, Lucas announced that she was the first recipient. She stood on the small stage, microphone trembling in her hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. I don't know what to say," she began, her voice shaky but resolute. "A year ago, I wouldn't have believed this could happen. I was a bully, someone who hurt others to feel powerful. But this place, these people, taught me that it's never too late to be better." The crowd erupted in applause. Pedro and Emily stood at the side, clapping with proud smiles. Henry, Jenny, and Jonas were there too, cheering for her. Maria glanced at them, a flood of gratitude swelling in her chest. She held up the small plaque, reading the words etched into the metal. Resilience Award, presented to Maria, for demonstrating extraordinary personal growth and dedication to community well-being. Her voice trembled as she continued. "None of this would be possible without the support of every single volunteer here. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for believing in me." Stepping off the stage, She was greeted by a chorus of congratulations and warm embraces. Pedro approached last, offering a quiet, steady hug. "Congratulations," he murmured in her ear. "You earned it." Maria pulled back, face still damp with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. Life would never be perfect." Pedro still carried the scars of that humiliating party, and Maria would forever regret the pain she had caused. But with time and sincere effort, they found a space where respect, and maybe even friendship, could flourish. Emily's career took off, her book garnering attention for its nuanced portrayal of bullying and redemption. Henry continued to support the community center financially, and Jenny poured her organizational skills into bigger and better fundraising events. Jonas, once a troubled teen, was now a mentor himself, guiding younger kids toward healthier ways of coping with anger and frustration. Maria's grandmother passed away peacefully a few years later, proud of the woman Maria had become. Though the grief was deep, Maria held onto the lessons her grandmother had taught her about humility, perseverance, and kindness. She continued volunteering, working, and growing. Pedro expanded his talks nationwide, frequently inviting Maria to share her story alongside him, proving that both sides of bullying could find a path to redemption. Together, they showed that forgiveness was not about forgetting the past, but about moving forward despite it. In time, the memory of Maria's grand, cruel birthday party faded into a cautionary tale, one that was overshadowed by the story of transformation, empathy, and hope that emerged in its wake. The community thrived, the mentorship program expanded, and the cycle of despair that once haunted Pedro and Maria dissolved into a promise of a better tomorrow. Standing on the stage during another community event, Pedro glanced at Maria, Emily, Henry, Jenny, Jonas, and the many others who had joined their cause. He began his speech with a bright smile. "When I was at my lowest, I never imagined I'd stand here with the people who helped me get back up, and the very person who once knocked me down. But life is full of surprises, and redemption is always within reach. We just have to be willing to fight for it." And they did, every single day.